Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Inflation slows in the Eurozone, but the ECB says it's in no rush to cut interest rates.
Our other headlines, that's echoed by the head of the US Federal Reserve, who says he needs more time to see evidence of falling inflation.
China's President Xi Jinping arrives in Kazakhstan before the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit.
Why orange juice producers are feeling the squeeze. We'll be in Brazil, the world's biggest exporter.
And enough energy to power 12,000 homes. China's new sodium-ion storage facility is the biggest of its kind.
Inflation in the Eurozone has eased slightly to 2.5%, but interest rates look set to remain unchanged. The flash estimate by Eurostat shows a 0.1 percentage point drop from May, largely due to lower energy and food costs.
But that was offset by rising prices in the services sector, which means that the European Central Bank is expected to keep the cost of borrowing at its current rate of 3.75%. when it meets in just over 2 weeks' time.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin. Trent, these figures will, of course, be welcomed by policymakers. Are there hopes now, do you think, that the worst inflation is over in the Eurozone?
Yeah, Jamie, just 0.1%, wasn't it? But I think those policymakers will take it. They will say that inflation is continuing to creep down, particularly from its record high of 10.6% that we saw when this big inflationary crisis really began across the 20-nation Eurozone. What we know, as you say, is there are some mixed results in these initial flash estimates. Yes, energy and food prices are down, and that undoubtedly will be welcome, particularly by households. But it is in the services sector where things do remain particularly sticky. 4.1% is the inflationary latest number for the services sector. That remains unchanged from just a month prior, and that is where we understand the Monetary Council of the ECB is continuing to look as a major pricing pressure point for European consumers, particularly come the summer. What many analysts are saying is that not just with the summer tourism season arriving, but a string of major cultural and sporting events across Europe, that we could continue to see high airline tickets, for example, and hotel rooms. And that will all no doubtedly feed into the data as ECB policymakers continue to assess whether to make a rate cut. But I think in particular what it will do is really apply that pressure on the services sector number, which is why many analysts are expecting that the inflation number overall will sort of still hover between 2 and 3%. We have to remember in all of this, of course, the central goal of the ECB is to get inflation down to 2% clean.
It's obviously the talk of the town, not just there, but also in Portugal, because the ECB President, Christine Lagarde, has been discussing whether there will be further rate cuts at the bank's big forum in Portugal.
Yeah, that's right. And speaking with her counterparts from across the world, and we know that this is an issue that's facing not just Europe, but other countries like Canada as well, the US. What Christine Lagarde said was probably no surprises, really, was that she will continue to gather what she called sufficient data before making any decisions around any further rate cuts. And look, you only have to listen to a few of the press conferences whenever they meet in Frankfurt. She consistently says she will be driven by the data, which is why I think those summer tourism numbers will be very, very interesting. What she also said is that the overall economic outlook in Europe right now remains quite uncertain. On one hand, the job market remains strong. Unemployment numbers are quite good across parts of Europe. But then you're seeing other areas which are quite sensitive to these higher rates, including construction and real estate. They are starting to really have some trouble and problems. So, look, overall, we don't expect a rate cut come July. their next meeting. Well, it is now July, isn't it? July 18th is their next meeting. They don't meet over August. It is summer in Europe after all. Many analysts are saying come September, that is really the meeting we're going to watch to see if there's any further rate cuts. Interestingly, just briefly, what Lagarde said around the last rate cut, which they implemented at their last meeting, was that that was just about moderating the level of restriction. That was not meant to be the firing gun signalling a big series of cuts. So she kind of putting some cold water on any immediate expectations of a sweep of cuts coming. Jamie.
Trent, thank you. Our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin.
Over in the United States, the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, remains cautious about cutting interest rates there. Speaking at an event in Portugal, he said he was happy that US inflation was falling, but that more time is needed before changes are made.
We want to be more confident that inflation is moving sustainably down toward 2% before we start the process of reducing how tight our policy is, of loosening policy. That's what we've said, and what we'd like to see is more data like what we've been seeing recently. We'd also like to see the labor market remain strong. We've said that if we saw the labor market unexpectedly weakening, that is also something that could call for a reaction.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Karina Mitchell in New York. So, Karina, how have the markets reacted to what Jerome Powell had to say?
Well, good to be with you. You know, the story here is that the anticipation was actually bigger than the news at the end of the day, because ahead of Powell's remarks, markets slid quite drastically. But as soon as he started speaking, they picked up some of those losses, reversed course, and the Dow was positive, just turned flat at the moment, but a big recovery amid markets. But all of this hullabaloo really to see if Fed Chair Jay Powell, while he was in Portugal, would make some news that was different from the same story that he's been repeating over here in the U.S., to see if there would be any movement on rate cuts. That is because the other two central bank partners that were there, ECB's Lagarde, cut rates by 0.25%. The Bank of Brazil also just cut rates. But the U.S. has stood pat, even though we're well off that 9% inflation high that we saw. Now, the consensus is that we will see, there's a 70% chance that we'll see a first rate cut here in the U.S. in September. Powell was questioned about that. He declined to answer. What he did say is that inflation is heading in the right direction. He's seen great progress. You heard that in the clip. But he wants to see more progress. He wants to feel more confident that inflation will continue to head towards its 2% target. He did say labor remains quite resilient at the moment. We saw that borne out in jobs openings data that we just got out today, which relatively unchanged at 8.1 million. But no real news there. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. We will get further insight into what this Federal Reserve is thinking, because minutes from the May meeting will come out tomorrow during the session.
We did see some big moves in the currency market, though. The dollar surging, the yen seeing new lows. What's going on there?
Yeah, well, that is a big story. Let's just start by saying the U.S. dollar is relatively strong. It's at a 2-month high, sitting there for the last week. Why is that? Because, well, it's relatively calm waters on this side of the pond, if you will. We've just heard there's no dramatic moves coming out of the Fed. We don't have our elections till later on in the year. But there is some pressure on dollar competitors. For example, you know very well, UK elections coming up, French elections also coming up as well. But as you say, the big story is dollar-yen. Dollar at a 38-year high compared to the yen. The yen is down by 12% just this year. Now, why is that? One big reason is because U.S. interest rates U.S. Treasury rates are rising. On the 10-year yield, it's firmly above 4.4%. The other big thing here is that the BOJ, Bank of Japan, is being painfully slow about cutting rates. Even if there is intervention to help prop up the currency, it's just going to be a bigger reason to pour into the dollar. And let's be clear, the Japan economy is struggling. It shrank by more than estimated in the first quarter. And the cost of living is just so high. The average Japanese person is really struggling as prices keep rising. On the flip side, if you're from the U.S. or Europe and you're heading to Japan, you'll definitely find some good deals to be had. Still, despite all of that, the Nikkei, the stock exchange there, finding new highs. Jamie, Robin.
Karina, thank you very much. Our correspondent Karina Mitchell in New York.
Regulators in France are said to be ready to charge Nvidia with anti-competitive practices. This would be the first country to take such action against the chip maker. Last September, Nvidia was one of a number of computer graphics companies targeted by raids in France as part of a broader inquiry into cloud computing. Neither Nvidia or the French authorities have commented.
Four of Japan's top insurers are to sell $3.1 billion worth of Honda shares, according to the Reuters news agency, after being told to reduce their cross-shareholdings by the Japanese regulator. The practice, where companies hold shares in each other, was widely used in Japan as a way to fend off threats such as hostile takeovers.
Tesla has recorded its second consecutive decline in new vehicle sales. The electric car company shipped just under 440,000 cars in the 3 months to the end of June, down almost 5% on the same period last year. Tesla has been hit by growing global competition, leading it to cut prices.
Shell has stopped construction at one of Europe's largest biofuel plants, blaming weak market conditions. The plant in Rotterdam is designed to convert waste into jet fuel and biodiesel. It's the latest biofuel project to be put on hold after BP suspended work on 2 plants in Germany and the United States.
Qatar Airways has reported record annual net profits of $1.67 billion. That is a 39% increase on the previous year and the highest in its 27-year history. The government-owned airline flew more than 40 million passengers around the world in the year to March.
China's President Xi Jinping has arrived in the Kazakh capital for a summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and a state visit.
President Tokayev greeted Xi at the airport. The leaders are expected to boost their strategic partnership, with Kazakhstan expected to be a major draw for Chinese tourists this summer. Well, our correspondent Li Jianhua is following Xi's visit. President Xi publishing a newspaper article outlining improving cooperation and improving the relationship.
Yes, Jamie, and publishing a signed article by the Chinese president for a state visit seems to be a part of the ritual. It is very important, and you can get a taste of the bilateral ties. In the case of China and Kazakhstan, Chinese President Xi Jinping highlighted the historical connections between the two countries. The bilateral ties could go back to 2,000 years ago, when a Chinese royal emissary paid a visit. It led this diplomatic mission to the so-called Western regions back then, which included Central Asia. And Central Asia was a very, very important part of the ancient Chinese Silk Road back then. And Kazakhstan was also the place where the China proposed Belt and Road Initiative. It was the birthplace of the initiative in 2013. And ever since then has deepened bilateral economic ties. And if we look at the bilateral trade volume between the two countries, it reached about $41 billion between China and the Central Asian country, and it is growing. And we also see extensive cooperation in renewable energy, especially hydropower stations and windmills, oil refineries and agriculture. Also this year, it's very likely the relations will be upgraded from the current permanent comprehensive strategic partnership. And China, Beijing says it doesn't form any alliances with any country in the world. So you do see a lot of partnership. What does it mean to have a permanent comprehensive strategic partnership? It covers a wide range of fields of cooperation, including politics, economics, trade, education, culture, and everything. It's likely the relationship will be upgraded as we go through the science article. And one of the signs of a comprehensive strategic partnership is more and frequent high-level exchanges. So ever since 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping has visited Kazakhstan for 5 times, and the Kazakh president has visited China for 3 times since May last year. And Xi says that he is expecting to have more in-depth discussion with his counterpart.
So President Xi will be at this year's SCO summit in Astana. Tell us more about the SCO.
Yeah, SCO, actually, it doesn't get so much attention in the West here. SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is a Eurasian political, economic, security and defense organization established in 2001. is it important? All of the member states account for half of the world's population and account for almost over a quarter, between a quarter and 20% of global GDP. It has been expanding. So it was established, as said, in 2001. It used to be comprised of 6 countries. So it was China, Russia, and 4 Central Asian countries, including Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, and it expanded to South Asia in 2017. It was the first time it added some new members to South Asia, including India and Pakistan. You don't see India and Pakistan in an international organization that much. And then it was extended again to the Middle East in 2023 after joining of Iran. And we have to keep an eye this year on Belarus. It is said Belarus is expected to join again.
Jianhua, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Li Jianhua.
As Jianhua was saying, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization aims to enhance trade relations, cultural exchanges and anti-terrorism cooperation between members, including China, Russia, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Last year, it expanded to include India, Iran and Pakistan. Our correspondent, Alyosha Milenkovic, reports.
Business people gathered in Astana for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization annual summit to discuss how they see the future of the organization. They talked about how to improve the collaboration between businesses in the SCO countries, and the optimism among them was palpable.
I think this is really an important and big event, a historical event. We, from the business circles, as businesses, see that each side, those who participate in the SCO, see the expansion of business relations within the SCO. They see that the barriers between the SCO countries have been reduced.
The meeting of the SCO Business Council was just one of the events that preceded a big event on July 3rd. On that day, the top-level SCO gathering will happen in the Palace of Independence.
Kazakhstan's capital is preparing for the most important political event of the year. The city has been spruced up, cleaned and polished ahead of the arrival of a string of high-ranking dignitaries from the SCO countries.
The workers are finishing the final touches around the building that would soon host leaders from SCO member countries. The agenda will focus on topics like further expansion of the organization, continuation of the process of de-dollarization of mutual trade, and expansion of security cooperation. The de-dollarization would seemingly be the most important of all of them, at least for the bankers. They say it is purely an economic question, as it is much cheaper to trade in local currencies than in dollars, and that would give a further boost to the SCO economies.
SCO has grown to become not only a political organization, international relations organization, has become an economic, because economy is underlying pretty much every fabric of our society, of our countries, and therefore without this dimension, it is very difficult to cooperate on a political level, international level, and things like that.
The 24th SCO summit is already labeled here as one of the most important gatherings in its history. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Astana.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead.
And here in the port of Grimsby, what does the UK election mean for the economy of the northeast of England?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Officials in India say at least 116 people have died in a stampede at a Hindu religious event. It happened in a village in Uttar Pradesh, around 200 kilometres southeast of New Delhi.
The authorities say a large crowd had gathered in response to a call from a local religious leader. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Ravinder Bauer in Delhi. Ravinder, what's the latest you've got on this?
Well, at the moment, rescue operations have come to an end and most of the injured have been shifted to the various hospitals in the nearby towns. Remember, Hathras is not a very big town, so they have been shifted to different hospitals, and some hospitals have been kept on high alert in case of emergency because some of these injured have serious injuries, and as the officials are saying, the death toll might rise as the time goes by because in this stampede, a lot of people fell over each other, and because it was also hot and there was a very small passage through which they were trying to exit. This all happened when the program was over, and now the questions are being raised why the proper arrangements were not made for these people who were attending. There were thousands, it's being said around 50,000 people were gathered for this religious prayer meeting, this religious congregation of a local religious leader who is absconding because now the police has registered a case against the organizers, and it is being said that the police had given permission, but only 70 police personnel were deployed for about 50,000 people who were gathered for this program. So definitely the situation was difficult to control, knowing that the proper arrangements, exit entry points were not made. And it is also being said and claimed by the eyewitnesses that there was a certain point which was blocked because of the religious leader leaving from the venue. Until he left, that point was not open, and that is what led to the situation which has led to so many loss of lives. And apart from that, the Prime Minister and the President have offered their condolences to the deceased. The Chief Minister of the state has announced a probe investigation will be done, and also financial assistance has been announced for the families of the deceased and the injured. And definitely it's like an unfortunate tragedy. Even if the police had given permission, it was important and mandatory for them to ask how many people were gathering. So these questions will only be answered, but for those who have lost their loved ones, mostly women and children, it's going to be a memory which they will never be able to forget.
Ravinder,
Jamie.
Thank you for that. Our correspondent Ravinder Bauer in Delhi.
Thank you.
Hungary's Prime Minister has called on Ukraine to consider a quick ceasefire with Russia. Viktor Orban made his suggestion during a surprise visit to Kyiv for talks with President Zelensky.
This comes a day after Hungary took over the rotating presidency of the European Council. Budapest is Moscow's closest ally in Europe and has previously blocked the EU's efforts to support Ukraine. Well, our correspondent Megumi Lim reports now from Kyiv.
Well, first of all, it looks like this surprise visit to Kyiv by Prime Minister Orban is a sort of extension of an olive branch to Ukraine. It looks like Prime Minister Orban is trying to mend strained relations between Ukraine and Hungary, relations that have been particularly strained, especially since the start of the full-scale war in 2022. For the reasons that you mentioned earlier, Hungary has repeatedly opposed the EU efforts to send military and financial aid to Ukraine, and has also blocked EU efforts to open accession talks with Kyiv, has regularly accused Ukraine of mistreating its Hungarian minority population. And as you mentioned earlier, Orban is considered Russian President Vladimir Putin's closest ally in the EU, and for these reasons, Kyiv and Budapest has had strained relations. But today, Prime Minister Orban said, as he met with President Zelensky, that he wanted to put past debates, past issues behind them and look to the future, which could mean signing a cooperation agreement with Ukraine in the future. Now, he didn't go into the details of what this agreement would look like, but he did say that it would look similar to the agreements that Hungary has signed with other neighboring countries. He also said that Hungary wants to help Ukraine in modernizing its economy, which has been obviously battered by the ongoing war. This could point to Hungary wanting to help Ukraine in its reconstruction efforts in the future. Now, Prime Minister Orban also, in his talks with President Zelensky today, suggested a ceasefire could more quickly pave the way for peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. However, a ceasefire is something that President Zelensky has never considered and also has repeatedly rejected in the past as a suggestion. He believes that a ceasefire would only allow Russia to prepare for another attack, to regroup and prepare for another attack. President Zelensky has his own peace plans in mind, which is outlined in the 10-point peace formula, which was the basis of the recent peace summit held in Switzerland. Orban was invited to the summit, which he rejected. He didn't attend this summit. Instead, he sent his foreign minister to attend. However, today, Orban did praise President Zelensky's peace initiatives, but not without mentioning that it is taking too long. And this is why Orban suggested today that a ceasefire could speed things up.
Lawyers for former U.S. President Donald Trump have asked a New York court to overturn his recent conviction for falsifying business records in a so-called hush money case. It comes after the Supreme Court ruled that sitting presidents are partially immune from prosecution, specifically over what it calls official acts.
Several cases against Trump are now unlikely to reach court before November's presidential election. Joe Biden says this ruling sets a dangerous precedent.
No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed. For all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the president alone.
At least 200 candidates in the French election have stepped down before the second round of voting on Sunday. Some members of President Macron's party and some left-wing rivals won't compete against each other in the hope of blocking an overall majority for the far-right National Rally. Marine Le Pen's party won on Sunday with around a third of the vote. Could win up to half of all the seats in the French National Assembly.
Voters in the UK head to the polls on Thursday to choose the next government. CGTN correspondents have been visiting different parts of the country to try to gauge what's on voters' minds.
Our correspondent Yolo Apdavid travelled to the port of Grimsby, where the consequences of Brexit, Britain's departure from the European Union, still loom large.
165, 70. To buy cod and haddock here, you have to be quick. The selling is fast and the fish are carted out as soon as they're auctioned. Buyers come from across the UK. In the 1950s and early 60s, it was the world's largest fishing port, and it still claims to have the busiest fish market in England. These days, most of the fish are imported from Iceland.
What matters is about the things around the business. Our business is just the fish, but it's the rules and regulations around employment, about minimum wage, about pensions, about rights and about access to getting to work, things that are actually the nitty-gritty of the business.
Grimsby's docks have seen better days. At one time, they'd be teeming with hundreds of trawlers. Fish processing is still big business. Some specialised companies are not only surviving, but thriving.
we've been smoking here in this method for well over 100 years. Brexit was the right thing to do. I don't want Brussels running our country, but it's only right that we should trade with our neighbours. It's bonkers that we shouldn't trade with our neighbours, and the common market should exist. It should have been reformed, and if Brussels hadn't been so arrogant, what they would have done is made the UK situation work.
8 years ago, this constituency voted 71% in favour of Brexit and breaking away from the European single market, despite possible adverse effect and other issues too. In 2019, it voted for the first time in 8 years for a right-wing politician to get Brexit done. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his Labour opponent Keir Starmer came to debate in Grimsby. Both they and their parties hardly mentioned the Brexit word, instead blaming the COVID pandemic and the conflict in Ukraine as the reasons why the British economy is in a perilous state.
It's been really bad. It really has. Because a lot of them on the dole now, and some of them are looking for jobs, but they're not getting them.
I think everybody voted wrong and nobody wants to admit that they voted wrong.
It's actually probably cost us a lot of money.
In my opinion, it was very, very bad because it stopped freedom.
Oliver Freeston was one of the UK's youngest Conservative politicians. Now he's joined a populist right-wing party and is keen to attract votes from the right and the left of British politics because, he says, they have failed the country.
They failed to deliver on the benefits that Brexit could have brought, and that's why people in Grimsby and Cleethorpes particularly are so angry about it, because we voted 70% overwhelmingly to leave the European Union, and a lot of people did that based on taking control of our borders.
He is confident, but the opposition Labour Party is predicted to regain this seat.
The paramount thoughts on people's minds is how much they have in their family budget, but they're also deeply concerned about the state of the NHS and post the pandemic, how we can recover and get more people treated and off waiting lists.
Just over half the population voted last time. There is frustration at the cost of living and the shadow of Brexit. Despite some public investments, others argue the quality of life here is deteriorating. They blame mismanagement of the economy, migration and too many empty promises. Politicians in these coastal areas hope they can catch a ballot box full of votes. Iolo Ap Dafydd, CGTN, Grimsby, England.
China and Switzerland have agreed to begin talks on enhancing their free trade agreement following a meeting. The Swiss Federal Councillor Guy Parmelin told CGTN that both sides are keen to talk about market access and tariff reductions.
Nous avons identifié avec le gouvernement chinois.
Switzerland and China collaborate across multiple sectors, with a focus on enhancing cooperation in key areas such as market access and tariff reduction. Additionally, the two nations exhibit strong complementarity in science and technology research.
You can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Fleeing Khan Yunis again. Israel orders people to leave parts of Gaza's second largest city. Some say there's nowhere left to go.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China's President Xi Jinping arrives in Kazakhstan ahead of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit.
Inflation slows in the Eurozone, but the ECB says it's in no rush to cut interest rates.
And that is echoed by the head of the US Federal Reserve, who says he needs to see more evidence of falling inflation.
Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are once again fleeing Khan Yunis in Gaza after the Israeli army ordered people to leave parts of the city.
Health officials say at least 8 Palestinians were killed and dozens of others injured in these latest attacks. Many Palestinians have been forced to move several times during 9 months of intense fighting and say there are no safe places left.
We have been displaced 10 times. Each time it cost us money and blood. Our brothers have been killed and our children have lost everything. They're left with no education, nothing at all. We are seekers of peace, not war. Enough is enough. We're facing a slow death. This is unfair. What have we done? We're innocent civilians.
Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari is in Gaza.
The situation continues to be very tense in Khan Yunis. The latest bombardment in Khan Yunis East area took the life of around 3 Palestinians. The bombardment is still continuous, be it the artillery fire or even the unmanned drones attacks that have been also targeting wide areas in the Khan Yunis eastern area. People have been struggling since the Israeli announcement that they should be leaving around 2/3 of Khan Yunis area and to head to the humanitarian area that has already been extremely overcrowded by the people. People were sleeping on the streets. People were sleeping in the open areas. People were confused as to how or where can they find somewhere safe to stay in. They were surprised by this announcement. They never expected it, and that left them with no much of a choice left. The Palestinians who have been displaced for 7 or 8 or even 9 times are now asked to leave again. And as I am talking to you, this area also was overcrowded last night with thousands of Palestinians who were fleeing and who were moving and who were trying to find some place to stay in. They don't have places, no more places. The ones who are coming to Khan Yunis cannot find places. The ones who are going to the Gaza central area are also facing extremely difficult situation where they're trapped with no hope whatsoever that they can find something or some shelter to protect them and give them a sense of safety and security. That sense of safety and security that has been compromised for the last few months and even compromised in the last few hours, where around 18 Palestinians were killed. The most recent fighting took place in Gaza central area, and particularly in Nusayrat northern area, where the Palestinian resistance was attacking the military outpost run by the Israeli operation forces in the Gaza central area, in Netzarim area, what is called the Netzarim corridor, an area that was confiscated and adapted by the Israeli army for the sake of using it as a buffer zone between Gaza central area and Gaza city and Gaza north. It proved to be like a very tender spot for the Israeli occupation, where they have been attacked repeatedly, and some short-range mortars have been fired toward the military outpost. Also in Khan Yunis area, the fighting is continuous, and some people are still killed and falling injured because of that continuous bombardment. Rafah area has been witnessing large-scale confrontation. In central east Rafah area, 3 Palestinians were killed in the last 1 hour when an Israeli manned drone targeted them, and the Israeli unmanned drones were just targeting everyone who's moving in that area, and the different hospitals, field hospitals in that area are receiving people who are killed and injured because of that ongoing operation that has been taking the lives and destroying the house. The bombardment and also the destruction of the Palestinian houses is still continuous, where the Israeli army has been destroying houses in Rafah, destroying houses in Gaza central area, and also in Gaza city and in Gaza north.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the military is nearing its goal of eradicating Hamas's military capabilities. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. So, Jonathan, what do we know about this IDF operation in Khan Yunis?
Eradicating Hamas's capabilities, says Benjamin Netanyahu. That is clearly not the case, considering the fact that some 20 rockets were fired yesterday from the area of Khan Yunis towards the Israeli communities on the Gaza border. So is Israel getting closer to that goal? Yes. Is it about to happen? Clearly not. Hamas still has capabilities, still has manpower, still has ammunition. So that is still ongoing. And this is what probably led Israel again to reinforce its actions in the area of Khan Yunis, where the Israeli actions were relatively slower for the past few weeks. Israel has been operating in Rafah, has been operating a bit further north in Gaza City, in neighborhoods like Shujaiya, like Nusirat, but not so much in Khan Yunis. And then this operation beginning overnight, continuing again this morning, and it's ongoing. Israel is, as I said, getting closer and eventually dealing with more and more Hamas battalions, but the mission of eradicating Hamas altogether is still not close, not on the military level and clearly not on the political level. Another question is, of course, is it even possible to eradicate an idea from people's minds, from people's hearts? That's another question which has been raised here in Israel, but at least on the military level, Israel is again taking on more and more Hamas battalions in various areas, now in Khan Yunis, previously in Gaza City, in Rafah, but as we've seen in the past 36 hours or so, still plenty of work for the IDF to do before that work will be completely done.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Our correspondent Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv.
Riot police in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, have fired tear gas at protesters who've taken to the streets again, calling for President William Ruto to resign. The anti-government demonstrations erupted last month over proposed tax increases and have continued despite Ruto withdrawing the controversial finance bill. Dozens of people have died in these clashes with the police over the last 2 weeks.
A right-wing coalition has been sworn into power in the Netherlands, 7 months after Geert Wilders' nationalists topped last November's election. Former spy chief Dick Schoof is the new prime minister after Wilders agreed to step aside. He'll lead a government that says it will implement the country's strictest ever policy on immigration. Schoof takes over from Mark Rutte, who's set to become the new head of NATO.
Firefighters in Greece are battling wildfires on the islands of Kos and Chios, but say the situation has improved in both places. Hundreds of tourists and locals who have moved overnight from Kos have been allowed to return. The Greek Prime Minister has warned of a dangerous summer ahead for wildfires after a prolonged drought.
Hurricane Beryl is set to hit Jamaica after being upgraded to a Category 5 storm. It's caused widespread damage in Grenada, where it made landfall on Monday, leaving 2 people dead. Another death has been reported on the island of St. Vincent, while thousands of people are without power or living in temporary shelters. Now there's a squeeze on orange juice around the world. The price has been climbing rapidly in recent months. Brazil, the world's largest exporter, has been hit by disease and extreme weather fueled by climate change. Soaring prices have also been driven by declining output in Florida due to hurricanes. The Sunshine State is the main producer of orange juice in the United States. Orange juice futures, when investors bet on the future price of an asset, are still up after hitting a high in May of $4.95 per pound. That is nearly double the price they were a year before, and follows similar trends in other commodities affected by climate change, like coffee and cocoa. Our correspondent Paulo Cabral reports.
Brazil is by far the largest producer and exporter of oranges in the world. It supplies more than 2/3 of the juice we all drink. So, problems in the orchards here have an impact everywhere. And problems have been big over the last few years, mainly due to a disease called greening.
This is the example of a plant severely affected by the greening. We can immediately notice all the fruits that have dropped to the ground before ripening. The yellowish leaves, very different from the beautiful green of a healthy orchard, and the small oranges, and not looking healthy at all.
The problems have become worse in recent years. Hot and dry weather caused by climate change damages crops, but it also allows pests to gain strength and expand territory.
e de extrema preocupação.
It's extremely concerning, and the number one factor today is greening. We have other disease, other concerns, but greening is a problem of extreme importance.
In Brazilian stores, the prices of oranges are already up and customers are complaining. A study by the University of São Paulo showed that in March 2024, oranges reached their highest price in 30 years, once inflation is factored in.
Subiu pouco da margem de preço.
The price has gone up. Not that we stopped selling, but customers complain a lot about the price being higher. We try to offer other products, like tangerines, as alternatives.
In international juice markets, price increases have also been dramatic, nearly doubling in comparison to a year ago. Orchards in the U.S. state of Florida, an important production region, have also been hit by greening.
The shortage in the supply of oranges is prompting some juice producers to consider introducing or increasing the percentage of other fruits, such as mandarins, into their orange juice blend.
This harvest is 24% smaller than the previous one. It's important to highlight that this 24% reduction is compared to a production that was already not large in the previous year.
Orange juice is a staple on tables all over the world, but now many people have to change their tastes or simply get used to paying more. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Aguaí, Brazil.
Let's talk now to Kees Koels, who's president of the International Fruit and Vegetable Juice Association. Welcome to the programme. Good to see you. So just how bad is this situation for orange crops?
This obviously is very bad. I mean, you've heard the numbers just now, and what we are seeing indeed is this disease that almost wiped out Florida over the last 20 years. 95% of the Floridian orange groves have gone through this disease, and now 40% in Brazil is affected. And on top comes the problem of the changing climate, where we have seen during the last crop period in Brazil, on average 10% higher temperatures and 30% more rain.
So it sounds like it's been a really difficult situation for farmers, but what about consumers? Presumably this is all putting the prices up.
It is, and it will further, because, I mean, obviously the orange juice business is a business that is done on the basis of people buying at the futures, but also making contracts. And I think the prices that we hear about today are have not reached the shelves so far. So I think we will see further price increases, and that will enact hopefully the consumers to stay with juice, which is a big market. It's a 7 billion consumption per annum, 50 million US turnover. So it's a big market. But obviously there is more than just orange. There is apple, there is tropical fruits, there is pineapple, there is all sorts of alternatives. And of course that is probably the way out for the industry, to start blending in different types of fruit or vegetable in order to keep the offering of juices on the shelves.
So if you're a farmer now then, are you thinking, I'll stop growing oranges and try and grow something else? Or are you thinking, let's try and save these crops that we have and solve that problem?
I think on the short term, we have to keep what is there. On the longer term, we have to go and find disease and changing climate weather resistant trees that can do the job under more, let's say, a difficult circumstance. So that's the long-term goal. But I mean, before we are there, that'll take quite a while. So we have to keep what is there and to make the best out of it.
And if you are someone who drinks orange juice, is it up to people who do to try and perhaps think differently, think of other juices, or perhaps not drinking juice at all?
No, I think there's plenty of raw material to produce juice. I mean, orange is a big part of the market. It's about 30%. But obviously there's apple, there's grape, there are all sorts of tropicals. So I would say there's plenty around. And with the creativity in the industry, I think we can still make great juices that have a good nutrition and fit to a healthy lifestyle.
So what about oranges, though? Clearly that's the most popular juice, the best, the one that's drunk most often. Do you think in 20 years' time we will still be drinking it in the way that we do now?
I'm convinced it will be the case, because I think modern science will give us the answers. to come up with what I just said, trees that are resistant to the disease and also to the changing climate. But again, it will take a few years before we have them, but I'm pretty sure that in 20 years' time we'll still enjoy our orange juice.
Kees, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today. That's Kees Cools from the International Fruit and Vegetable Juice Association.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, enough power for 12,000 homes. China launches the world's largest sodium-ion energy storage facility.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. It can store 100,000 kilowatt-hours of electricity, enough to power 12,000 households. China has launched the world's largest sodium-ion battery energy storage project.
The facility began operating this week. China's leading the way in sodium-ion batteries, which provide a more affordable and environmentally friendly source of energy than their lithium alternative.
Sodium-ion batteries have good safety and a low-temperature operating performance. At -20 degrees, they can still guarantee 85% charging and discharging efficiency, which is unmatched by other batteries.
Well, let's talk to Professor Stefano Passerini, who's an expert in electrochemical energy storage and a senior advisor at the Austrian Institute of Technology. Professor, welcome. Good to see you. For those of us who are not distinguished scientists like you, just explain why this is such a big deal, and particularly better than lithium-ion batteries.
Well, the great advantage of sodium-ion batteries is mostly on cost. It has to be said that right now, actually, lithium-ion batteries are so cheap in a sense that sodium-ion batteries cannot make it through fully. But in the future, as soon as the electromobility will grow further, that we will again go in shortage of lithium-ion battery materials, and then sodium-ion batteries will become more advantageous.
Now,
additionally,
sorry to interrupt you. I just want to talk about the safety aspect of this, because you will well know that there are concerns about battery storage. In fact, we've reported on this programme the concerns about batteries catching fire and exploding. What are the safety concerns associated with sodium-ion batteries in particular, and what are the challenges of dealing with this?
Well, actually, from the safety point of view, sodium-ion batteries might be or are expected to be much safer than lithium-ion batteries. One of the reasons is that there is no copper inside, which is the source of some problems. And the other reason is that they can be shipped actually fully discharged. So this is actually making them much safer than lithium-ion batteries during shipment, because lithium-ion batteries need to be at least 30% state of charge, otherwise they might have big problems.
I can see why people like you are excited about this development, but how long before this is scaled up and available much more widely?
I mentioned before in my first answer, actually, the reason why sodium-ion batteries are not widely commercialized is that lithium-ion batteries are very cheap right now. I mean, you can buy lithium-ion batteries in China for like 70 euros per kilowatt hour or even less, depending on the kind. And this is obviously slowing the entrance in the market of a new technology. It's difficult to enter a market when the leading technology is so low cost. But in the future, lithium-ion batteries will increase in cost again, and then sodium-ion batteries will deeply penetrate, especially in the stationary storage market, but also light-duty vehicles and motorcycles and so on.
Sodium-ion batteries are noted for their performance in low temperatures, aren't they? I mean, how does this enhance the overall efficiency and the reliability of the power station?
Well, this is definitely an advantage of sodium-ion batteries. You might remember, I mean, people will remember what happened at the last winter in North America when in all the news were shown cars, electric cars, which were just out of power, okay, in the middle of streets. Sodium-ion batteries can guarantee better performance during winter, and this is also pretty important for non-electromotive application, where you can have maybe some stationary storage, and you don't really need to carefully control the temperature of the batteries.
What part?
Yeah.
What part will this play, do you think, in the global shift towards renewable energy and sustainable power storage solutions?
Well, if you consider that the electric vehicle market is growing very fast, but also the stationary storage is growing at more or less at the same pace, 100% increase every year in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, in Europe as well as in China. So sodium-ion batteries, with their expected lower cost with respect to lithium, can keep this increase going, okay? And then having a large energy storage, but even if small units delocalized in many different places, this can definitely help the transition to renewable energy, because they can optimize the use of renewable energy sources.
Professor, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Professor Stefano Passerini.
The Badminton World Federation has announced a thorough review after a 17-year-old Chinese player collapsed on court during a tournament in Indonesia and later died. Zhang Zhejie suffered a cardiac arrest during a match on Monday. Officials have been criticised for the amount of time it took medics to respond.
The defending women's Wimbledon tennis champion has been knocked out in the first round. Marketa Vondrousova was beaten in straight sets by 21-year-old Jessica Bouzas Monero from Spain. Vondrousova is the first defending women's champion in 30 years to go out in the first round.
Two-time Wimbledon champion Andy Murray has withdrawn from this year's men's singles tennis tournament as he recovers from an operation. The home favourite had surgery to remove a spinal cyst just over a week ago and has already said his career is likely to end this year. Murray will get to say a final farewell to Wimbledon as he plans to play in the doubles tournament with his brother Jamie.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.